Let's begin with our first session of the day, setting the scene. So this panel will explore a vital question at the heart of our forum. How can skills development, investment in local industries and strategic partnership enhance supply chain resilience while advancing sustainability goals? So we're joined by a truly esteemed panel of experts and change makers. You see them here from both the public and the private sectors, working across Africa, Europe, and beyond. So please welcome, and now you have to give them big round of applause, Symerre Johnson, Director of Social Development at the African Union Development Agency. Welcome. Just come to the stage. Karin Svensson, we know you, Chief Sustainability Officer at Volvo Group. Come on. Jonathan Francis, Senior Policy Specialist for Private Sector Financing at Sida. Welcome. Juan Pablo Davila, Head of Skills Development and Fair Production at UNIDO. And joining us virtually is Mona Iddrisu, Head of Youth Employment and Skills at the African Center for Economic Transformation. Hendrina Doroba, Manager for Education and Skills Development at the African Development Bank Group. And okay, so are you with us? Probably very soon. Welcome. How do you feel? How are you?
Good. Very well, thank you.
So happy to see you here. Okay. Hi. Good morning. Where are you? Where are you calling in from?
Good morning. So I'm joining from Accra, Ghana.
Ghana. And you, Hendrina?
Good morning. I'm joining in from Toronto, Canada.
So a warm welcome. So Symerre Johnson, why is local value addition essential for industrializing economies, and how can it drive more inclusive and sustainable growth?
No, thank you so much, moderator. I think I wanted to perhaps contextualize why, for the African continent, value addition is so important for obvious reasons. Of course, I'm sure we all know the statistics that Africa has a youthful continent. 60% of its population are youth. We know that we have a challenge in terms of employment, in terms of job creation. So local value addition becomes more and more important to ensure we have sustainable jobs, entrepreneurship. But to contextualize it, of course, for the past 8 years or so, we have been working towards skilling the youth. But we've done a good job. Of course, we partnered with Festus. I'm happy that that is here. We've also worked with the European Union, KfW, the German government, to introduce a program called Skills Initiative Africa. So we've done a lot of work in terms of skilling Africa's youth, but we have not done enough to ensure that the skills we've worked on under the Skills Initiative of Africa is attracting the right industries. So our focus now is on value addition, and we are working on a new program creating opportunities for youth and women in Africa, KOIWA, which will now do that skills mismatch. So the value addition that is needed for Africa's youth, but specifically looking at industry, what does industry, what sort of jobs, what sort of skills will industry want to see to ensure that we have the local value addition that we needed as a continent. Of course, we work within the context of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So the idea is to make sure that through the Skills Initiative for Africa, we match the right skills to industry, entrepreneurship, and employability, sustainable jobs, and. But in order to do that, we need to address the mismatch and to get that value addition. And then finally, to contextualize the direction that we are taking as a development agency, knowing fully well that the next generation of jobs will most probably will be digital jobs and megatronics and so forth. The skills required for these industries will actually require a lot of technology and a lot of tech transfer to get that value addition. So this is the big task ahead of the African continent. Youthful population, still a continent that is struggling to industrialize, to add value, beneficiation, still a continent that has not been able to really attract the right skills to get us to where we're supposed to be as an industrialized continent. But at the same time, we have spent a lot of time on skilling, but are we spending and investing in the right skills to attract the right skills that will drive our economic transformation and growth on the continental free trade area? So where we sit, we are really very desperate to have the skills mismatch and the skills gap, the retooling, and making sure that as a continent, we are prepared to transform ourselves as the people. So that's the context I wanted to explain. There's a lot happening, but we are not addressing the supply side that will attract the right demand. So demand is not being matched with the supply of skills. And I think this is why we're here today.
Yeah, crucial. Skilling and the skills gaps and the whole mismatch. Thank you so much. Mona, Iddrisu, why must youth inclusion be a strategic pillar of workforce development?
Great. Let me just check if you can hear me.
Yes, we hear. Do we hear? Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I think this is a nice timing to come in, building on the previous speaker, because at the Africa Center of Economic Transformation, we also work in these areas within the African context. And as he has rightly said, for us, it's no longer a nice to have. We are approaching a point where it's an absolute necessity to center young people when it comes to workforce development, because as he has mentioned, we have this youth bulge that if we are not very strategic and intentional about how we're building that workforce and transforming that bulge into productive or transferring it into productive areas, we're likely to have a scenario where we have a melting pot of young people that are underskilled, underemployed, and rising levels of poverty, and it has implications in terms of economic progression for us and economic transformation on the continent. So just to emphasize that for us as a continent, it is not just, it's imperative. It's not just the moral aspect of it, but even economically, we cannot waste much time in terms of youth inclusion. Now, also, I want to talk about the digital aspect of this. And rightly, as the previous speaker said, we have a skills mismatch. But a lot of it, we're still, as a continent, we're still challenged with the very basics of things, right? We still have issues when it comes to digital access, particularly for vulnerable populations in rural areas and young people that are in urban poor areas, where digital access is still a problem. We still have issues when you go down to the pipeline, which is primary education, secondary education, before young people come into the labor market. We still have issues around providing digital infrastructure in schools, right? Because for us to have a workforce that has these digital capabilities, we need to tackle it right from the root. We need to be integrating these skills right from primary curriculums to secondary curriculums, so that by the time they come into the workforce, it's not now that we're trying to retrain or upskill young people. So we need to be looking at it in terms of both the entire ecosystem of the education system. Here at ASSET, we have a huge focus on TVET, technical vocational education, and one of the opening remarks emphasized this. Now, when we look at the area around TVET, young people, TVET has a potential to create a workforce for young people that can spur Africa's economic transformation. Value addition means industrialization. We need that infrastructure. And what will then feed that infrastructure is the skills force, right? And this is primarily one of Africa's biggest opportunity if we harness it properly in the next 5 to the next decade or so. So looking at it from that aspect, we need to be harmonizing education systems, making sure that labor is easily moving across the continent. We need to be looking at it from a regional integration angle in terms of youth inclusion. Because if we're looking at it individually in silos as countries, we might not be able to meet that demand that the previous speaker was talking about. But looking at it from a regional lens and integrating these education systems and labor movement, then it becomes easier for labor to move into the industries within the continent that there's demand for them. So if you're in Kenya and you have a skills that's highly in demand in Ghana, there's that ease of mobility into those productive sectors. So the final point I would like to make on this is that whilst this is important, we need to be looking at it from a regional lens and implementing these regional protocols that we already have around labor movement for young people to make it easy to move into these productive sectors, but also looking at harmonizing education and industrial policies across the continent. Some of these paperwork already exist. It needs to be implemented more immediately and with more urgency.
Thank you so much, Mona. Karin, Svensson, how can targeted skills development bridge existing gaps to advance resilience and sustainability in supply chains, would you say?
Thank you very much. I think what I would like to talk about today is the development of skills and how we see that that can unlock business opportunities for us, how that can secure long-term resilience, but also how that can help us to meet sustainability goals. So if I take an example, today we have in many markets problems to expand due to the shortage of mechanics, but also of drivers of commercial vehicles. And this shortage is not only a business concern for us, it reflects also a broader issue of youth employment in many cases, but also of gender imbalance. This is, of course, something that is true not only for our industry, but for many industries, where we can see that, and we've heard this before today, that there is a skill shortage, and at the same time, there is a mismatch between competences and what is available. Something that, of course, very often impacts vulnerable people to be able to be self-sufficient. But if I come back to the global shortage of technicians, mechanics, and commercial drivers and how we can address that, I think that is a great example of how we as a business can help our customers, we can help society, and at the same time, we can create value for us in the Volvo Group. We take the example of Ethiopia, where we have millions of people today involved in low-skilled work, very often with low education. The existing system for technical vocational schools is not good enough. It's quite theoretical and it's very poorly resourced, which makes the students coming out of these vocational trainings not really prepared for the real challenges of the world. So to tackle this challenge, some years ago, we initiated a public-private development partnership together with Sida and UNIDO to create the first vocational training school of commercial vehicle drivers in Ethiopia. And we saw this because there was a growing need for drivers from the private sector. It's also important to mention that our project do not only focus on technical skills of the drivers, but we also see this as an opportunity to do more of road safety training. And then we can tackle another safety, sustainability problem, that of road safety in Ethiopia. And hopefully we can reduce the number of road accidents significantly. We have also worked together with the Ethiopian transport authorities to make sure that we can set standards for teachers and students, that we can develop new curriculums for the commercial driving schools. And from a Volvo Group perspective, we do provide both equipment, but we also train the trainers. We are this year finalizing this project, and then we're handing over the school and leaving our support. And we can see that we have some great results. We have today established a fully operational training academy for commercial vehicle driving. We have this new curriculum that is approved by the authorities, and we have trained many trainers, and they have now updated technical skills. I don't know how many you think we have been able to train during these years, but it's actually 9,000 young trainees that have graduated.
9,000?
9,000.
Wow. Is it men, women? Is it?
You can guess. How many do you think are men? How many do you think are women? I'm happy that you are you have a good faith, but we have 13%, which is, I think, fairly good still. But of course, this is something that we also work a lot with. And Ethiopia is just one example. What we are now doing is that we are reusing these curriculums also to help people in other countries. We are also doing vocational training in other countries, so far in Zambia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Morocco, and latest we are moving into the Western Balkans, and we have pilots also running in Ukraine. And in Ukraine, we're actually solely focusing on women for obvious reasons. Our vocational training initiatives, they have to vary a little bit by region and by country, but the impact is quite clear. Over the 10 years that we now have been involved in different types of vocational trainings, we have graduated 12,000 individuals, and we have a 70% employability rate after 6 months. I think this is quite amazing. And most of them are not working for the Volvo Group, of course, but they are working in the industry, supporting us and our customers and society in different ways. Before I end, I also wanted to mention another initiative that we call Iron Women. This is an initiative that has been running in, for example, Peru and South Africa, where we are training women to become truck drivers, but we're also training them in entrepreneurship, a way for women to start their own business in trucking.
Amazing.
Finally, to conclude, I think it's really important to do target skills developments as that can target our business needs, and at the same time it can increase long-term economic stability in different communities.
Thank you so much, Karin, for sharing this. Jonathan, Francis, what role do partnerships between regional and global actors play in building skills for resilient supply chains?
Thank you, Alexandra, and good morning to everybody here and online. Partnerships have always been a really core part of Sida's business. I mean, we've always worked through partners. There's nothing new about that. What's new now with and as my colleague Maria mentioned earlier, with the Swedish government's push to work more actively with the private sector in particular. So that's sort of a bit of we've done that in the past, but we're trying to do more of that. And that's because we see the private sector as a source of both innovation, expertise, financing, as we just heard from Volvo. The public-private development partnership instrument that we have is one that we use. Quite a few of the ones that we've been funding working with Volvo. We also work with Tetra Pak, who's here today. We work with some other businesses as well. So we have quite a few examples of that. And then I thought I would just mention briefly about the example in Zambia, where I was previously based in Zambia. And there we had a partnership with Volvo, with UNIDO. And so the three of us were together, or UNIDO was implementing it, funding by Volvo and Sida. And then it was to the Northern Technical College, which is based in Ndola in the Copper Belt. And so the purpose of this initiative was to build the skills and to support the Northern Technical College, and focused on it went through two sort of cycles of activities. The first one was focused on the mining sector. The second one was focused more on commercial transport. And the initiative was very much about a lot of the sort of similar things as was taking place in Ethiopia. I mean, so it was building skills of men and women. It was different types of programs that were available for them, but it was also building the capacity of the college, the Northern Technical College as well. So, for example, it was investments in, I mean, Volvo donated a lot of equipment that was really valuable for them, but it was also training of trainers. And then one of the important aspects of the initiative was that this college, the Northern Technical College, would become a center of excellence that would also support 10 other colleges around the country. So it was sort of, you know, funneling the resources through that one college out into the rest of the country. So it was a really interesting and important initiative. What the numbers I've had, 680 students have been trained to date. But then again, it's sort of building the capacity of this institution to continue providing this support. And then they also were able to increase the number of females in the program from 1% up to 13%. So not a long way, but as we know, it was very much about changing norms and expectations. And this was a sector that really wasn't very at all common for women.
Thank you so much. Hendrina Doroba, how can partnerships be better leveraged to unlock investments in skills development and human capital for local value addition?
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Can we hear? Yes, we do. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Let me just start, first of all, of course, appreciating UNIDO and its partners for inviting the Africa Development Bank to be part of this timely and relevant conversation. And I'm saying this because at the Africa Development Bank, we are implementing the 10-year strategy, which is running from 2024 to 2023. And this is putting a lot of emphasis on youth and putting them at the center of our engagement. But to operationalize this at the bank, we are also working on the Jobs for Youth in Africa strategy, as well as the skills for employability and productivity in Africa. Both these frameworks are actually guiding the Africa Development Bank on how they are supposed to support the regional member countries. And when you talk about, you know, partnership in all this, for us, this is very critical. And we're looking at partnership both from the private sector, the public sector, and so on. Now, to actually be able to guide and support our engagement in driving the Africa transformation, the bank has developed a public-private partnership strategic framework. And this framework was actually developed in cognizance of funding, but also the implementing gaps that we thought exist on the continent. We also do recognize that often the public sector is strained when it comes to sector resources. And so we felt it will be, and it is important to have a comprehensive way of mobilizing resources and private sector playing a critical role. Now, in terms of emphasis for this framework, I think I want to highlight two things. One is there's a lot of emphasis on infrastructure development and also exploring on, you know, how we can work collectively or in partnership with private sector to be able to drive the infrastructure transformation. And in that, we put skills development at the center. So making sure that we are embedding skills in the PPP contracts that are being developed, and we're also making sure that we are supporting governments to put policies in place that makes local workforce training as mandatory. We also provide technical support to governments. Again, this is also to support them, not just to design the PPP pipeline or project, but also to make sure that this is aligned to national policies and priorities. Now, just to give you a few examples on how this is being operationalized, currently we have an 80 million investment investment in Nigeria, where we have the Equity Zone Knowledge Project. Again, here, this is where we are leveraging support both from the public and the private sector. And we are looking at making sure that we are able to generate at least 25,000 direct jobs and indirect jobs. And also we see opportunities where private sectors will be able to contribute and help to ensure that we have at least 12 million investment income coming in at least over the period of 5 years. The other example I want to give also is the kind of partnership that we have with GIZ, where we are implementing the Build for Skills initiative. Again, this is underpinned by the public-private partnership, where we are seeking to expand practice-oriented technical vocational education by integrating this directly into projects or infrastructure projects that are funded by the Africa Development Bank. Lastly, also just to mention that in Kenya, we are also supporting the enhancement of quality and relevant higher education in science, technology, and innovation. And here we also have a very good example where our support has been catalytic in making sure that we bring in the private sector. And I'm talking about what is going on in the Dedan Kimathi University of Technology, where they have established partnership with Siemens, also seeing now Dedan Kimathi as a regional training center for East and Southern Africa. And Siemens has also been able to support and develop the capacity of the university to be able to provide the necessary equipment, but also practical experience for industrial automation. So these are just some of the examples of how we are now operationalizing the public-private partnership. And we'll be excited to just explore other partnerships and just ensure that we work together. I know there are many other examples that I could give, but I would like to stop here. That's the way to go. Government do not have enough resources. Private sectors who are also beneficiaries of the skills development, we need to continue working together and support the transformation of this continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hendrina. Thank you for all these examples. I really love to hear them. Juan Pablo Davila, how can public-private development partnerships successfully use targeted training to strengthen local capacities and support sustainable industrial development?
Thank you.
Wow, what a question.
Yes, I was listening carefully to understand the question, and I think
don't bother about the question.
The key words are targeted training, and I think this term has been expressed with my colleagues here in the panel as demand-driven. We see the system of skills development linked to industry as demand-driven. We always talk about skills mismatch. What is the demand? What is the offer? And sometimes, in many cases, we have the problem of the chicken of the egg. The chicken of the egg, or the egg, is okay. You don't have the investments in the country because you don't have the skills, or you don't have the skills because you don't have the companies that the people can work there. So targeted training, as we see it in UNIDO, is we have a real opportunity for employability. And what are the skills mismatch that we need to work on there? This is a pull system and not much a push system to say train as much as you can, but really pull. What is the industry? What is the economy asking you to have the skills? So that's where we see, and together with the PDPs and the partners here, we focus on what are the needs of the industry and what are those skills that are really required now or in the immediate future, and how can we build these partnerships together with governance? We talk about ownership, that everyone is involved because everyone is a stakeholder in this process. To put an example, we are working in West Africa with a mining company that it's a refining company of alumina in West Africa, in Guinea, to be very specific. Guinea has the largest resource of bauxite in the world. bauxite is the material that is used to make aluminium. And first you make alumina, and then you refine it further to make aluminium. The capacity of refining it on the country is 4%, and they are exporting around 88 million tons of bauxite, but only 4% is refined. So there's a huge potential for value addition. We are working with the private sector, with the refining company that has plans to have a refining investment in the country, but the youth are not prepared to really fill out those jobs with the right skills at the right moment. So we're working from now, together with the government, with the private sector, to look at what are the skills that will be required in 2 years, and how this targeted training can drive, as part of the question, sustainable development. It is a pull system. That investment will require specialized technicians, specialized engineers, and that will catalyze and spearhead the pulling of many parts of the system that many times it's fragile. So if we see the skills development value chain, we see young people that we need to be trained on basic things and then more specialized. And then at the end of the value chain, you have the really specific needs of the industry. If one of these links is not fulfilling its work, then we will not have the young people reaching the jobs at the end. So that pulling factor needs to make sure that all the value chain of skills development is working accordingly, with the right skills, with the right moment. So in that sense, we see that targeted training really pulls the value chain of skills development into a more practical way to have employability. If you see physically a chain, you cannot push a chain. You have to, in order to move a chain, you need to pull the chain. So we see that investment in that needs as the pulling factor that will pull the whole value chain. But we need to work together. And I think some of the examples that were share on the PPDPs, the public, private, and development partners, working together are good examples to replicate and see what are the next generation of these public-private development partnerships.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Symerre Gray-Johnson, how can national policy framework and international partnerships better address structural skills shortages in value-added sectors?
Thank you. I'll want to take it from where Juan left it, on targeted training and targeted demand-driven training for the skills needed. But maybe I take a few minutes, 2-3 minutes, to give the context we are operating in, so that perhaps we can have a better appreciation on how dangerously alarming the situation we are dealing with on the African continent is. I talked about the 60% of youth and a growing youth bulge. So I'll structure my intervention in 3 parts. I'll call it politics, policy choices, partnerships, and projects. So if you look at the African continent, Nigeria has about 260 million population. Ethiopia is next, about 100 million. DRC, Ethiopia is about 220 million, and DRC is about 100 million, then Egypt, about 80 million. And then most of the African countries, with Tanzania, 42 million, Madagascar, about 32 million, then most of them are around 16 million in population. And then you have the little ones, Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, so forth, Cape Verde, 2 million, 2.53 million. But then we have a regional integration agenda. We have a continental free trade agenda. The question now is the politics of it. How do we move into the policy choices we make? Where do we invest? Resources are not in abundance. We are dealing with the same development partners. The same governments support a regional agenda. The fiscus, it's contracting. They have to look at peace and security. They have to invest in infrastructure. They have to invest in climate change. Now we want them to invest in skills. We want them to invest in industry. So what choices do we make? And I think this is where the partnerships are important. And the partnerships are important, and I've listened to the great work of Volvo, and of course the great work of Sida. Where do we invest in this training and the skilling and the retooling and addressing the skills mismatch? Is it Nigeria? Is it Ethiopia? Is it the most of the countries like Zimbabwe, Zambia, Chad, that are 16, 17, 18 million in population? Or is it just the west coast of Africa? Is it North Africa? So these are the difficult policy choices we have to engage with government and to decide at the continental level, where do we invest these projects that we are running, whether it's the Skills Initiative for Africa, whether it's the Creating Opportunities for Youth and Women in Africa, our social development program, and I'm glad we are here with a good friend from the European Union, Camilla. We will be investing very soon on the social inclusion, social protection to ensure we have entrepreneurship and employability for the vulnerable communities. Where do we invest? And I think these projects that we are running, for instance, in the Skills Initiative for Africa, we have 48 projects in 8 African countries. Is that enough? No.
48 in 8
African countries. We also have on the COIWA, we are dealing with 4 of the 8 regional economic communities, strengthening the SADC region, the ECOWAS region. But is that enough? No. And I think this is where these partnerships are so important. We know where the challenges are. We know what needs to be done. But where is that critical added value? So when we choose a project, when we roll out a project, how much of that project will give us that catalytic change that we need? So that's where these partnerships are so important, whether it's with the European Union or whether it's with Spain of ICED or GIZ and KfW of Germany or Sida of Sweden. But we need to really think it through. Where do we make that impact? Make sure that employability, sustainable employability exists, as Juan said, is the chain. But where do we go? Where do we invest? And that's where we sit at the continental level. That's our daily headache, knowing the situation that we are facing in the next 10 years. For instance, by the year 2040, 1 out of 3 able-bodied youth will be African. But it will most probably an unskilled African that does not have access to jobs, to sustainable jobs. So these are the discussions. We are doing a lot, but we need to answer that question on partnerships. How do we get the politics of it to appreciate that skilling, technical vocational training, industry must do this match? And that's the daily headache.
Yeah, that's a challenge. Yeah, thank you. Mona Iddrisu, how can training and education systems stay aligned with rapidly evolving industry needs, especially in green and digital sectors?
Thank you. And the discussion has been very interesting, just listening in. Johnson raised a point around how, and I just want to use it as an opportunity to discuss one of the areas or the approaches we're using at the Africa Center for Economic Transformation, and highlighting the importance of research underpinning some of these partnerships and data-driven or evidence-driven projects and implementation. So one of the approaches we're using in terms of answering some of these questions around how do we structure these investments and some of these partnerships is looking at regional value chain approaches, right? So looking at tracing, because if you take, for example, the cotton value chain, rather than looking at it in countries, say Ghana, we produce cotton, Cote d'Ivoire does, Burkina Faso does, but tracing the value chain and identifying with data which areas within that value chain do countries have comparative advantage, and how do we structure value addition along these value chains so that each country is adding value, specializing within their comparative advantage along these value chains, so that governments along these countries are investing strategically through partnerships, and ensuring that we're creating these jobs and then aligning it with skills development. So rather than looking at it as what is the value chain for cotton in Ghana, and rather than Ghana trying to do everything, we look at it in terms of regionally. How can 4 or 5 countries come together to invest in different stages of this value chain and this value addition to create jobs and to align skills development systems to this? So just to highlight, we do have a study coming out next year where we're zoning in on some of the value chains. Digital is another, the creative economy is another. We see a lot of young people in the creative economy, and we're asking ourselves, how do we invest in these as regional value chains? We take digital, how do we invest in this as regional value chains to create jobs, so that we're looking at mass job creation? So that's one way. I also want to come back to the importance of labor market and information or intelligence systems. And this, as we can see, is contributing to the skills gap, right? So if we're talking about how do we align industry needs to education system, how do we do that if we don't even know what industry needs? Where the intelligence system to gather this rather than ad hoc on project basis? How are we building policies, and how are we building regionally to gather this information or to structure this intelligence so that it's timely and it's up to date, right? So that you already know what your labor needs are going to be in 2 to 5 years' time. And you're not only reactive, but you're proactively able to train your young people ahead of these future jobs that will open up. For example, I like to use Ghana as an example because I live here, but we have nations that resource-rich nations. We recently discovered we have a good amount of lithium, right? But now that we know, what are we doing to ensure that we're preparing young people for jobs that could come out of this sector? And rather than reactively waiting until production hits the ground before we're training, and by then we're playing catch up. So investing in these labor market intelligence systems is very important for governments to prioritize. I know a number of steps have been taken in this direction, but I need to emphasize. And then we come to in the area of TVET. I just want to talk about a little bit about the green economy and sharing some data we recently collected as part of a 6-country study we're doing on TVET. We're doing a comprehensive study. It should come out in September this year, where in these 6 countries, including Cote d'Ivoire, Niger, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Uganda, and Ghana, we're looking at our TVET systems really fit for purpose. And it's a wide scoping study. So we're looking at greening our TVET systems in this country, preparing young people for the green economy. And we see that the demand for green skills in these countries are increasing. And yet in some countries, like in Niger, only about 9% of students reported even knowing about green skills and the green economy, right? So we see that there is a lot to be done, and yet we're looking at jobs close to 100 million plus jobs coming out of this sector in the next decade. So what are these education systems doing to ensure that we're preparing young people for green skills, with green skills that could provide jobs for them and prepare them adequately? We see emerging promising practices in countries like Rwanda, but I need to emphasize more broadly the importance of this. And earlier on, I spoke about also the importance of digital. Again, in this study, we're seeing that we still don't have, in most curriculums in school, it's only the very light touch digital literacy that we're still tackling. We're not even incorporating advanced digital technology in curriculums. So we're still battling with things like that. And we look at on the teacher trainer side, because for TVET in Africa, a lot of training happens in the informal sector. in the non-formal sector, not just in structured TVET formal systems. And so how are we ensuring that those skills that are being transferred in the informal, non-formal are of quality, are incorporating digital skills, are incorporating some of these necessary skills that we're talking about? So if we talk about it, we also have to be talking about how we're doing so in the informal sector, where a huge chunk of young people are actually trained, and not just in these formal structures, and how we can ensure that we are partnering or linking both industry in the informal sector to industry or to training systems within informal sectors to ensure that we're giving young people these skills that they need. And finally, around private sector engagement, we see a huge appetite both from SMEs to MNCs on the continent for engaging TVET systems to be able to deliver. And we need to be linking not just to students, but we need placement systems for TVET trainers in industry. What tends to happen a lot of times is that we have TVET trainers that come from teacher training colleges into classrooms. They're far removed from industry. Some teach 5-10 years and never go back into industry. So we need closer linkages, because if the trainers don't have the technology, they cannot pass on what they don't know. So we need to be looking at it also from strengthening teacher TVET trainers with industry linkages, and we have appetite for it. There are lots of private sector players that are interested in this. Governments needs to ensure that we're providing structured pathways to ensure the skills transfer between TVET education systems. And
thank you so much, Mona. We don't have too much time left here, so thank you so much. Karin, Svensson, what role does embedding environmental, social, and governance standards into workforce training play in building sustainable, fair supply chains that meet increasingly regulatory stakeholder expectations?
Again, a long question.
Yeah, long question, but please break it down.
Yes, let me summarize what I would like to talk about. I think in my previous intervention, I talked about how we build individual skills for individuals in different countries. But of course, it's not only individuals, it's also the system that needs to be skilled, so the whole value chain. So let me share 3 examples of how we embed our sustainability principles into action throughout the value chain, and by that we can create more of resilient supply chains. So the first thing is that we are setting very clear expectations on our suppliers. We have a responsibility to identify and to mitigate and to prevent any negative impacts to people and to the environment in our own operations, but also, of course, through our suppliers. And therefore, we have developed what we call a supply partner code of conduct, where we very clearly state what it requires to do business with the Volvo Group and what we expect from our suppliers. We base then on our 3 sustainability pillars: climate, so we expect to work towards the Paris Agreement to be net zero by 2040. Resources, we know that there is an increasing need for transportation and infrastructure solutions, but that has to be met with not more resources, but to be kept within the planetary boundaries and the limits of that. And then people, we want ourselves and our suppliers to invest in health and safety, to empowerment, business ethics, and human rights. And we want to ensure that our products are safe, but also people working in our operations and at our suppliers. So in our supply partner code of conduct, we have 2 levels. We have what we call requirements. This is mandatory for all suppliers. And then we have expectations. And that is to encourage our suppliers to move beyond what is the bare minimum. That's my first example. The other example is, and several of the panelists have talked about partnerships and the need for collaboration. And of course, our efforts when it comes to sustainability has to be focused on where we have the biggest risks. And one of those areas is minerals. So we are part of what is called a sustainable mineral program, where we work together with others to ensure that we have responsible sourcing and that we can reduce human rights risks in these value chains. We want to improve transparency and we want to work closely with our suppliers. And we have, since the start of this program, been able to attract more and more participants into these programs, which of course is really great, because to achieve these goals, we have to work together, not only the manufacturers, but also the mining stakeholders, NGOs, etc. And my last example is how we can work to improve the collaboration in our workplaces. And some of you might be from Sweden, so you know a little bit about the Swedish model for how we work together with the employer and the employees. And then we are part of what is called the Swedish Workplace Program. This is an initiative by NIR, the International Council of Swedish Industry, where we try to strengthen workplace relations. This is a program that promotes a two-way communication, giving employees a chance to be heard and to influence policies at the workplace. We talk about important topics like health and safety and work-life balance, something that can build trust and respect, benefiting both the business and also employees. In the Volvo Group, we have worked with this, for example, in South Africa with very good results. So by trying to integrate our sustainable principles into the way we are working, this is for us not only about compliance, this is really about creating resilient and sustainable value chains for the future.
Thank you so much, Karin. Jonathan, what factors make public-private development partnerships effective in delivering skills that lead to real employment outcome?
Thank you. I think one of the keys is what we often talk about, local ownership. And what I mean by local ownership is that the actors in the particular place where we're working, they are the ones driving the process. In the case of the example I gave before in Zambia, it was the Northern Technical College, and they were really the core part of this. And I think it's really important to emphasize Volvo, UNIDO, Sida, we were coming outside with resources, but it was really their ownership and the governments, the Zambian government more generally, but in particular the college, that really made the difference. And I think it's also a reminder that the resources that come from the outside are only ever a small part. And as you were mentioning with the making choices, I mean, these kinds of interventions make a small difference, but it's really changing the governments themselves and the local institutions working in a different way. That's the core. Secondly, and this has come up in quite a few points before, like relevance to local demand and local markets. I mean, we talked about the right types of skills. In the case of the Zamita project, it was really strong engagement with local businesses, making sure that the local businesses were informing them what kinds of skills were needed, also to make sure that employment opportunities were available afterwards. Volvo's involvement was also a way to make sure that the skills were relevant. And then finally, I want to talk about impact. And, you know, we talk about public-private development partnerships. So the development part, it was partly, and I mentioned before about getting more female mechanics trained. And that was a challenge, you know, in a context where there really was no, and which is the case mostly around the world, actually, but you know, very few female mechanics. So it required a lot of activities using social media and outreach and talking and getting successful graduates, female graduates, to talk to others about it. So, but another example that we worked on and that this project worked on was reaching out to rural, vulnerable groups, and in particular rural communities. So not only people in the town in Ndola, in the city of Ndola, but also out in the countryside who had very few opportunities. It was an outreach to make sure that there was students applying to get into the program. And there was, in that case, it was specific additional funding provided for accommodation and so on. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible for them. So that was a really important part to increase the development impact of the initiative.
To reach out beyond the urban. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Hendrina, what are the priority reforms needed to build a future-ready workforce that can support Africa's industrial transformation?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much. I think for me, and maybe building on our experiences with our engagement with regional member countries and of course with the private sector. We need to be looking at the priorities, first of all, making sure that we align the priorities with what national governments are prioritizing. In our own engagement with various government, we've seen that we've learned that government ownership, alignment with national priorities, as well as coherence with different entities makes the project successful. And so when we are looking at prioritizing or looking at the potential areas of prioritizing, I think we need to look at, how do we support governments? And when I talk of governments, I'm also looking at support within cross ministries, so that in whatever work or policies that are putting in place, they ensure that there is cohesion, but more importantly, that we put the issues of human capital development at the center. Because if we are doing this huge investment, and in the case of the Africa Development Bank, for instance, I do know that we are known for as an infrastructure bank, but one of the things that we look at also is the issue of, how do we support government regional blocks to make sure that the policies that are put in place are not only looking at investment from the hard component, but they're also looking at the soft component, which is the human capital development. But for all that to happen, we need to ensure that we have regulatory policies in place, both at national level, at sub-county level, but also at a regional and sub-regional level. So in our engagement or support to regional blocks or the African Union or the national governments, we do ensure that there is that alignment of policies, but also the priorities are also aligned to the broader agenda of the Africa that we want. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Policies and priorities. Juan Pablo Davila, why is investing in local human capital critical for fostering innovation, competitiveness, and long-term economic resilience in global value chains?
All questions starting with why, we can end up into a very existential answer. But I think why investing in human capital is good for competitiveness and economic resilience. I think many of the responses were also already shared on why we're doing this and what are the benefits at the end of the value chain and beyond, not only at the industry level, but also the economic benefits of that. What we see, I mean, the human is at the center of everything. So if we don't have the skills to develop a process, to monitor a process, to construct, to operate a machine, to operate a system, then we will not have any development. So human development and human capabilities is at the center of our development. Having said that, we need to look at what are the areas that are still missing. And I want to come back to one point that was mentioned about how can we attract those vulnerable groups or unrepresented groups in industry, because they need to be attracted not at the end of that value chain, they need to be attracted at the beginning of the value chain. To put one example, in Austria, where the UNIDO is based, I was thinking of putting a heat pump in my house. So I asked the person to say, okay, how much is it? Okay, good. When can you put it? And he said, well, you have to wait 6 months. Why 6 months? Because that's the waiting time. Why is that the waiting time? We don't have the skills to install a heat pump or a photovoltaic. Why you don't have the skills? People are only interested to work in manual things. And I think this is a very important aspect that we need to take into account, because if people are not attracted to go into a specific trade at the start of the value chain, we will not have anyone at the end of the value chain. Yeah. So it's another aspect that we're really looking into it to say, okay, how can we attract new generations into those trades, in those areas that are needed for industry? And that's also a system or microsystem of offer and demand. What is the demand of the youth? What youth wants now? And what is the demand of, at the end of the value chain, of industry? Not only on the trades, but also on the genders. Why do we don't have so much female participation in some of these trades? And many of these aspects we have been doing in Samita, in Zambia. Some success stories we have, but I think now youth generations are changing dramatically with all these innovations, digitalization, AI are changing dramatically, and we need also to be changing at that same page or anticipate to that. So coming back to why skills are important, they are the basic of development. I mean, the fact that the person knows how to do the know-how are what is driving development in the right or in the wrong way. And I think this is a challenge that, coming back to partnerships, we all need to see, okay, what's the stake into my part of that, on my stake, and if we don't come together to solve that problem at each stage of the value chain, and specifically at the beginning of the value chain, where if we don't have anyone here, we will not have anyone throughout the value chain.
Thank you so much for reminding us to keep coming back to the why. And finally, I would like to offer you all 1 minute maximum for each of you for some kind of call of action or call for action or any kind of reflection.
No, thank you. I think I'll want to say one thing, listening to this very enriched conversation. In September, the African Union Development Agency and the African Union Commission and the Regional Economic Communities will be hosting an Industrial Skills Week Africa. And the reason that is exactly what Juan said. If industry does not project what sort of skills Africa will have to provide, then there won't be any industry. So the Africa Skills Week, the Africa Industrial Skills Week is very important because for the first time we will have at the highest political level, ministers of labor, ministers of industry, minister of employment, minister of science, technology, innovation coming together and addressing this issue of getting the right skills. Secondly, added to that, we are creating the Africa Critical Skills Bank together with the Africa Capacity Building Foundation. And I think our friends at Asset, Mona and colleagues will be part of that work so that we can predict the next generation of skills through this critical skills bank that the continent will need by 2040. So 2 important points. We invite everybody to Lusaka, Zambia, week of the 8th of September for the first Industrial Skills Week Africa, where we will showcase the second point, this big critical skills bank that we will project the next generation skills needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Symerre. Karin?
Yeah, I think what I would like to underline is the importance of shared value. This will never work unless it's good for society, it's good for the individual, and it's good for the business. Otherwise, because we all talk about the need for partnership, we talk about the need for private investment, for us to come together to close this gap of skills. But we need to ensure that it is a shared value. And if we can do that, I think we have all the opportunities actually to get this going in a very good way.
Thank you, Karin. Mona Iddrisu, a final word.
Thank you.
1 minute.
Yes. I would like to join colleagues in emphasizing that this needs to be regional efforts. So if there's one thing I want us to leave here today with is that when we're thinking about skills development, when we're thinking about value addition on the continent, let's think regionally. Let's think, how do we ensure that we're harnessing the advantages or the opportunities we have as a continent as a whole. So that will require countries to come together and involving young people in restructuring some of these policies and systems we need to move forward.
Thank you. And Hendrina, your call to action.
Thank you. My call to action is really around two issues. One is the skills development. If we are looking at transforming Africa, we need to make sure that we accompany that transformation with skills development. So human capital should be at the center of our investment or our engagement. Secondly, the issue of aligning to national, regional, and continental policy would be critical if we want to move together. Thank you.
We thank you. And then Jonathan?
Well, so much to say, but I'll just keep it very brief. We see that it's very open to new partnerships. We're actively looking for new opportunities in these areas. So please take advantage of today to come up and talk to us. And we have this instrument that I talked about, and we have multiple instruments that are flexible. We can be adaptable and adjusted to the circumstances.
Thank you so much. And finally, Juan Pablo.
Thank you. The call to action, well, many things come to my mind, but I think I'll make reference to the youth framework that we have at UNIDO. I mean, the youth framework, we're looking at what is the youth needing, and we're looking at 4 key pillars. One is the skills development that we have been discussing. Another one is entrepreneurship. So the young person can have the choice. You want to work for a company, you want to set up your own company, and the different skills that are needed. The third pillar is decent employment. Many of the young people are underemployed or not paid as they need to pay or with difficult conditions. And the fourth pillar that is very important, and I would say most importantly, is to include youth in the policy development of youth solutions. Because these are at the heart of the problem and the solution. And I think that's my call to action, is to include youth into the discussions at the policy level, at the skills development, because it's them who have the choice to go and be trained or not to go or to set up. And so we need to listen to them. And coming back to partnerships, just to repeat one thing that I learned when I was in Africa a long time ago. If you want to go far, go together. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think this is a call for partnerships and including the youth into the discussion.
Thank you so much. So bring youth to the table, to the decision making, and also women. Thank you so much. A big round of applause. Thank you for your contribution.